Welcome. Today I'll share a story about compassion and forgiveness, a lesson that reveals the true strength of the human spirit. Let's begin. At the base of a towering mountain, nestled within a dense forest, a monk walked alone. He carried nothing but his robe, a bowl, and a simple staff. Though he owned nothing, his heart was rich with peace and wisdom. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, the monk chose a spot beneath a mighty banyan tree to rest. He sat cross-legged, eyes closed in meditation, as the forest around him came alive with the sounds of the night. Unbeknownst to him, a gang of robbers was watching from the shadows. These men were hardened by a life of violence and greed, their hands quick to wield their weapons. The leader of the gang, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, motioned to his men. "Let's see what this wandering fool has," he growled. The robbers crept closer until they surrounded the monk. One of them jabbed his sword into the ground, just inches from the monk's feet, breaking the silence. The monk opened his eyes slowly, his gaze calm and unwavering. He looked at the robbers, then smiled gently. "Good evening," he said. "What brings you here?" The leader stepped forward and sneered. "Enough talk. Give us everything you have." The monk nodded. "You may take what you wish. I own nothing of great value, but you are welcome to my bowl, my staff, and my robe." The robbers were stunned by his calmness, but the leader growled, "Do you think we're joking? Stand up!" Before the monk could move, one of the robbers shoved him roughly to the ground. Another tore the bowl from his hands, throwing it aside. Still, the monk remained composed, his voice steady. "You do not need to harm me. I have nothing to defend." "Stop talking!" the leader barked. He raised his hand, signaling one of his men to strike. A robber stepped forward, drawing his sword. Without hesitation, he swung at the monk, aiming to frighten him. But as the blade came close, the monk made no effort to resist or defend himself. Instead, he closed his eyes, his posture serene. The sword stopped mere inches from the monk's neck. The robber froze, his hands trembling. "Why don't you fight back?" he demanded. The monk opened his eyes and looked at the robber with deep compassion. "Because I do not see enemies before me," he said. "I see men who carry pain. If my life eases your suffering, then take it." The robber stumbled back, his sword falling from his hands. The others looked at him in confusion, then at the monk. The leader, furious at the display, grabbed the monk by his robe and pulled him to his feet. "Do you think your words will save you?" The monk met his gaze. "My words are not meant to save me. They are meant to save you." The leader's grip tightened, but something in the monk's eyes stopped him. There was no fear, no anger, only understanding. The monk continued, "I see your anger, your pain, your struggle. You believe violence will bring you what you seek, but it will never fill the emptiness within. Let me ask you, what is it you truly need?" The leader's hands trembled. For a moment he said nothing, his jaw clenched. Then he released the monk and stepped back, his face a mix of anger and confusion. "What kind of man shows kindness to those who harm him?" he muttered. "A man who understands that kindness is stronger than hatred," the monk replied. "Anger begets anger, but compassion can break the cycle. You do not need to carry this burden anymore." The leader looked at his men, who stood frozen, their weapons lowered. Slowly he dropped his own sword to the ground. "Enough," he said. "We're leaving." The robbers retreated into the forest, their footsteps heavy with uncertainty. The leader paused before disappearing into the shadows, glancing back at the monk. "You're a strange man," he said quietly. "Perhaps you're right." That night, the monk remained under the banyan tree, undisturbed. The weapons the robbers had dropped lay scattered around him, silent reminders of the power of forgiveness. The surrounding forest, once filled with tension, now exudes tranquility. And so, the power of compassion and understanding prevails. This story reminds us that even in the face of violence, compassion can disarm the fiercest hearts. By choosing love over fear and understanding over anger, we can break the cycles of suffering and transform even the most hardened souls.